Three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Jan Stocklassa, and he comes to us all the way from Sweden. He's 9 hours ahead of me, and he has just published a very fascinating book that I finished last night. The title of that book is The Man Who Played with Fire, Stieg Larsson's Lost Files and the Hunt for an Assassin, and its English publication was just this month, October 1st, 2019. So it's available now on Amazon, and it's a very fascinating book of events that took place in Sweden with the death of Olof Palme. But Mr. Stocklassa is published the book in Europe last year. The title of that book in Europe is Stieg Larsson's Archive, The Key to the Palme Murder, and it has been sold in 50 countries and translated into 27 languages. And his first book was published in 2007. That title is Caught by Prague, and is based on real events that exposes corruption in connection with Saab and British Aerospace's attempts to sell supersonic jet fighters to the Czech Republic. And in the aftermath of that book, police investigations were opened in 7 countries. He has also been a Swedish diplomat and launched new newspapers in the Czech Republic, I think at the time, and has been also a journalist. So his website is his last name, Stocklassa, STOCKLASSA.com. And I'm just delighted that he's here today. John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and it's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for agreeing for the interview. Excellent book, very fascinating, incredible details. And for people who don't know your name, can you talk or add to the background that I included in the intro, and then talk about how you became interested in the subject of what we talked in the pre-interview, which is really the European JFK, the death of Olof Palme.
Well, I had written my first book in 2007. That took me 3 years, actually. So I started in 2004, and I published it, and pretty soon after that, I started to look for another topic, and suddenly there was a murder happening just next to my summer house, more maybe like a winter house, since we're in Sweden and it's pretty cold here. But 3 kilometers or 2 miles from the summer house, they found a woman dead. I googled the name of the farm where she was killed, actually, and I found a completely different murder, 170 years earlier on that same spot. And that I was really fascinated by that. So I started looking for more places where there may have been double murders or double crimes, and I found a few more spots in Sweden. I was going to write a book about that. But when I was doing research into that, I found a place in the center of Stockholm where there was a crazy person living who was running a campaign against our Prime Minister, Olof Palme. And I started doing research into this character because he would be really great in that book that I was writing. And in an archive, I found a paper that wasn't signed, speaking about a middleman in the murder of our Prime Minister. And I asked the lady who had the archive, who wrote this, and she said, Stieg Larsson, the crime writer. And I was completely flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say. Why do you speak about our crime writer, that he was doing research or whatever? And she said, yeah, he spent many years actually doing research into the unsolved murder of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. So that's how I got into this story, by a lot of coincidences, actually.
Interesting. And for people who don't know about Stieg Larsson, can you talk about him and his importance to Swedish crime fiction?
Well, Stieg Larsson is the star of Swedish crime fiction that you may know under the name of Nordic Noir or Scandi Crime or something like that. But he has sold 80 million books. It's the Millennium series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, you may know. And actually, he knew that he would be famous. He just turned 50 years old. He had written 3 books, handed them in for publishing. And just then, when he had got his first advance, he walked up 7 stairs and got a heart attack and died. So that's part of his fame also.
And that was in 2004, so even before his books were published and became internationally famous. He also, one of the interesting things about this book and what it enriched my understanding of Stieg Larsson is he had a journalistic life prior to the publication of those books. And you can kind of see how his earlier life influenced his fiction and how the same themes went into his books. Can you talk a little bit about Stieg Larsson's research and how you came across it and why it was important to your investigation?
Yeah. So he actually sold, when he died, he hadn't sold one single book yet, only the contracts for it. And after his death he has sold 80 million books. So he was actually a poor guy. He was a journalist. His mission in life was actually to write about and to map networks of right-wingers in Sweden and in Europe mainly. So that was his mission that went on for his whole adult life, actually. And but from that research that he was doing continuously, he actually got interested in the murder of our prime minister. He was at the time he was working at the Sweden's largest news agency called TT, and our prime minister was killed on the 28th of February, 1986. So we're more than 33. It's more than 33 years ago. And in the morning after the murder, Stieg Larsson came into his office, and his task was immediately to make a map of how the murder had escaped from the scene. He was also an illustrator, actually. So he got all the information from the reporters of this news agency and started drawing this map. So quite soon he was one of the persons who knew the most about the murder, actually.
That's fascinating. So he was writing articles and really on site, and that murder was a shock to the people of Sweden of all different political backgrounds. Can you talk a little bit about how the murder took place and the events surrounding the death of Olof Palme in 1986?
Yeah, it's definitely a defining moment in Swedish history, and if you would compare it to something in the U.S., it's definitely the JFK. It's a moment that everybody in Sweden, they know what they were doing when he was killed, and what they were doing when they heard about the murder. It was obviously winter. And the winter is dark and cold in Sweden, and it was a Friday night, and our prime minister had decided to leave his home together with his wife. They had called off the bodyguards. That was something that would sound naive today, but in those days he actually thought that he would be safe in Sweden. Nothing would happen. That he was in a safe haven in the world. That proved wrong. They went to a cinema, to a movie theater. The late show started around 9 p.m. in the evening. They got tickets, even though it was sold out, since he was the prime minister. They managed to get some seats for them. And 2 hours later, lots of time for someone to prepare, they stepped out of the theater, started walking along a street, and some half a mile later, a man stepped up from behind and shot one shot in the back of our prime minister, and he fell down. And before he hit the ground, he was dead.
And it was a very high caliber weapon, right? It was a Magnum 357, is that right?
Yes, correct. And also metal piercing ammunition. So it was not the best gun to use for such a killing, and the fact that they only shot one shot is something that make me and many other people think that it was actually not a professionally performed action.
Fascinating. So there was another shot fired that grazed his wife. Is that correct? So there were 2 total shots in the middle of the night in a non-silenced weapon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Magnum revolver with that type of ammunition is extremely loud, and so no silencer, and also only the 2 shots. So the second one was a miss, as you say. It grazed the wife, and I actually believe that it was aimed for the prime minister, but since they were using the double action, had to use the double action on the second shot, it was actually, he turned the gun a little bit to the right and grazed the wife instead.
And then what happened next?
The murderer stood for a couple of seconds, then put down the gun into his jacket and started running into an alley, up stairs that are quite steep, 89 steps, and that was almost the last. That was the last thing we know of him, actually.
So Palma died almost immediately. What was his background, and why would he have antagonists who wanted to see him dead?
Yeah, that's a really important part of the story, because that's what you realize while reading my book or getting into this topic. Because he was actually quite important in world politics also. He was the greatest statesman of Sweden in the 20th century, possibly in the history of Sweden. He was his aim was actually, he was always on the side of the smaller states in the fight between the superpowers, the USA and the Soviet Union. Then he was also on the side of always on the side of these of the smaller countries, and that the third world mainly. So it was in Africa or in Latin America or in Southeast Asia, and that led to that he had a lot of problems actually in international politics. The Soviets didn't like when he criticized the invasion of Afghanistan or Czechoslovakia earlier, and the USA didn't like when he was criticizing the Vietnam War. So he was actually disliked abroad, and also in Sweden he was actually loved by half the people and hated by half the people, if you simplify slightly.
Right, and he was a devotee of what was known as the Third Way, right? So he didn't align himself with either power bloc, but still had I would say, a strong social conscience. He was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. He had been in contact and friends with people in South Africa. So, and also just involved, he was a very high IQ person, also was from a privileged background. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. The anti-apartheid engagement went on for his whole political life. His first political action was actually to give blood and collect money against apartheid, in the fight against apartheid, for the fight against apartheid. And so he was that type of character who was actually engaging always, what he called the third way in politics. And you had a question more there? William? Are you there?
Sorry, I hit mute. Is there anything else about Olof Palme that you would like to add, or that I missed?
You actually said some. I missed a part of your question. I forgot it. So
I apologize. I'm hitting the mute button. I'll edit this out. Is there anything about Olof Palme, about his third way or his activism, or anything else that you would like to add before we kind of get into the details of the investigation into his assassination?
Well, Olof Palme was from the upper class. So when he became the leader of the Social Democratic Party, he was actually viewed as a traitor of that camp, the right-wing camp of Sweden. And at the same time, he was so intelligent and so well-spoken that he came out quite arrogant in debates. So he was, even among social democrats, he was also considered at least foreign. So he had actually enemies in all camps, also in Sweden.
Gotcha. And so how did the investigation progress? And can you talk about Stieg Larsson's investigation as well, please? So
if Olof Palme was the greatest statesman of Sweden, he was actually too big for such a small country as Sweden. And when he was killed, the murder also became too big for Sweden, for the Swedish police. So they didn't know how to handle this. So from the beginning, from immediately after the murder, everything was handled, or not everything, but there were a lot of mistakes made in the first night and continuing through the first years of the investigation. One of the mistakes was actually to appoint what the government thought was a very loyal investigator, a person who was actually close to Olof Palme, Mr. Hans Holmér. The only problem was that he was a high police officer, but he had never investigated a murder, and he became the responsible. And he actually started going immediately in the wrong direction. He was starting to look at the Kurdish Liberation Army, the PKK, Liberation Organization, the PKK, and went for that trail for a full year before he was sacked, actually. So we lost a full year of investigation, and obviously Stieg Larsson was following this, and he was gathering his own information, and he was gathering information mainly on right-wingers in Sweden, right-wing extremists. That was sort of the second trail that some police officers believed in, but they didn't get the attention of the head of investigation.
And at that time, Stieg Larsson was working for, it was described in your book, it was they called it a radical magazine. But how would you describe his work and his outlook at that time in 1986?
Well, in 1986, he was, and for quite a number of years, he was actually still working in the news agency, and that was more of a normal media outlet, collecting information and distributing to newspapers. Some years later, he started the radical magazine called The Expo, which is the role model for Millennium in his novels. But he was. Since he was at this news agency, he got a lot of information, and together with the mapping and the research that he was doing into the right-wing networks, he was actually one of the people that knew the most about what became the main trail in the second year of investigation.
I see. Now, what was that trail?
That was the right-wingers of Sweden that were cooperating together with the South African Secret Service to kill our Prime Minister. And Stieg Larsson started collecting the information and actually handing in information also to the Swedish police. He wrote memos, and he met them several times and handed in information that they acted on in the second year of investigation.
And he was a very detail-oriented investigator and kept a lot of his newspapers and files. And can you explain at what point all of that information, you became aware of that information and how you got a hold of it and how it was integrated into the book?
Well, let me just add that in the second year, after the second year of investigation, it was really close actually that they would have solved the murder if Stieg Larsson was right, and I believe he was. But then we got a new head of investigation that said, no, it's not a conspiracy. This is a loony, one person who has killed our prime minister, and he went off in the wrong direction again, and we lost. That went on actually for another 3 decades.
That was Christer Pettersson, is that correct?
Yeah, the person that they found was a drug abuser called Christer Pettersson. But just 2 years ago, we got a new DA, a new prosecutor, who's leading the investigation, and he's called Christer Peterson. So the prosecutor, Christer Peterson, has said that no, it wasn't the drug abuser Christer Pettersson who did this. So they have got the same name actually, which is another twist in this story that I think only Stieg Larsson would have made up.
But yeah, I mean, you can see that the whole twists and turns of this real life situation informed his fiction. It just feels like even the vignettes in your book, you can just see this kind of Swedish, kind of Gothic elements of this put into his fiction. It's really fascinating. It was really incredible read for me.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. So, how did you find out about Stieg Larsson's investigation into this, and how did that become something you looked into?
Well, you can imagine how Stieg felt when they went off in the completely wrong direction for actually a long time. But he continued his work until he died in 2004. He knew that he would be famous, and he had a lot of information on the murder of Olof Palme. But when he died, the people around it, they were completely paralyzed. They didn't know what to do with everything. And there was this turbulent situation with a suddenly world famous close person to them. So they took his papers and packed it into cardboard boxes and just put it away into a rented storage facility. I forgot about it. And that was in late 2004. And then 9 years later, 2013, I had come on my own path through different coincidences. I have come to find this paper by Stieg Larsson, and then later I realized that there's more. And I found this rented storage facility and persuaded the people to open it up for me. And I thought maybe I'll find a box or maybe 2 boxes or whatever. And we pulled up this iron door, and there were 20 boxes full of Stieg Larsson's documents on the murder of Olof Palme, documents, memos, his letters, notes, you name it. So that was one of these defining moments for me.
And you integrated those into the book, starting off the book as one of his papers. He was in contact with a guy, Jerry, I forgot his name, in England. So he was having these exchanges, these letter exchanges with other people talking about this event. So that was a really incredible aspect to the book, was these inclusions of Stieg Larsson's original impressions about the assassination, at the time of 1986, 87, so I thought that was a fun aspect. So how did it continue? Once you got all of his information, what happened next?
Well, you're right. The first letter is fantastic. It's seven pages where it describes the murder and it describes the witnesses and everything to his friend Jerry Gable in the UK. So it's actually I think it's a pretty obvious start for a book, but it's what I did then was actually I started scanning, I started reading, I started organizing it, and it was pretty clear pretty early that he tried several theories over the time, as an investigative journalist should do, but then he quite soon had a main theory, and that was that the South African Security Service organized the killing of our Prime Minister. They used a middleman that Stieg Larsson handed in a memo about, a 30-page memo that he handed in to the Swedish police already 1 year after the murder, and that middleman found helpers and patsies in Sweden, Swedish citizens that were actually helping out in the murder, and they were mainly right-wingers.
And was that Bertil Wedin? Was that the middleman that you're describing?
Yes, yeah, that's Bertil Wedin in northern Cyprus. That's the middleman that Stieg Larsson wrote about.
And Bertil Wedin was part of a Stay Behind group and had affiliations with Operation Chaos or something. You wrote about that. And I think those are themes that my listeners would know. I've covered Operation Chaos, but
you did? Cool.
Yeah, so
that's great.
Yeah, it keeps popping up. I did an interview with somebody about James Jesus Angleton, who was the head of Operation Chaos and had been in Europe and had been involved with all these post-World War II groups, right-wing groups. So
there's an excellent book about Operation Chaos by Matthew Sweet from the BBC, dealing mainly with the Vietnam deserters living in Sweden, Stockholm. And they were infiltrated by Operation Chaos, by the CIA.
Well, I'm sorry, continue.
No, so probably.
Well, we were talking about Bertil Wedin and Bertil. Maybe you can talk about Bertil Wedin and why he was important to an important figure in trying to investigate the assassination.
Well, Bertil Vedin was part of Stay Behind in Sweden. Stay Behind, that it was actually founded in Sweden by William Colby, who later became the CIA director. Vedin belonged to the Stay Behind, and as he said to me when I met him in Cyprus, that he was part of the more right wing of the Stay Behind group in Sweden, but he was also very close to the business leaders of Sweden. So he lived for 10 years in London until 3 months prior to the murder of our prime minister, when he suddenly moved to northern Cyprus, the Turkish occupied part of Cyprus, where he has stayed since. And that's a pretty good place to stay if you don't want to get extradited, because it's not a non-recognized country, so there are no ways of getting to him there. So he's been living there for 33 years more.
And he's still alive as of today, correct?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the Swedish police have known about him since the first days after the murder, when they got the first information that he may be involved in the murder, but they haven't met him. They haven't even interviewed him properly by phone or anything. So, but they've confirmed that they are trying to meet him.
So they aren't able to do something that you did in person, correct?
Yeah, and I think it shows a bit how slow, probably not professional the Swedish police is, because I went down there 6 years ago, and managed to find the place where I lived, and I managed to find a phone number to him. I called him up and got an interview with him first it should be for 1 or 2 hours, and in the end I spent three not close to full days with him, drinking beer and actually asking all the tough questions that the police should have asked him.
Yeah, and that's all included in your book, the 3 days of discussing with him. And he's a little cagey, but he did provide information about his relationship with all these other kind of people that seem to have been involved in the assassination. Can you talk about his background in South Africa, etc.?
Yeah, he was. When he moved to London, he started acquainting the Monday Club, where the Tories of the UK were. So he had big contacts into the right wing of England also, right wing politicians, even meeting with Margaret Thatcher, and then he was also accused of having performed burglaries in London into 3 offices of the Liberation Organization, so Southern Africa, and in the end he was freed, but he admitted to me and to others that he was actually working for the South African Security Service, also that you call BOSS. BOSS, yeah.
And at that time, okay, I'm sorry, please continue.
And the person that recruited him was Craig Williamson, also called the Master Spy of South Africa. And Bertil Vedin, he told me how he actually got to hear about him after a scandal in Sweden where Craig Williamson had been infiltrating an organization, and when he was revealed as an infiltrator, Bertil Vedin read about him and admired him so much that he went down to South Africa to meet him and started working for him, handing in information to the South African Security Service.
And at that time, let's see, in 1986, the apartheid was kind of on its last legs in the 80s. I think the final change of government was 1994, but there were the South African intelligence security services were very active, not only in South Africa but all over Europe as well, trying to engage in a covert war to restrict anti-apartheid activists. Can you talk about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
It's a little too long. But the South African security services were involved in bombings and anti-apartheid. They were trying to subvert anti-apartheid activists. And I think that that's important in looking at the Palma case, because I think within that context you can see all these bombings and killings that were taking place in Europe at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, definitely. They were, and they were doing it. The South Africans were actually active also in Europe, so they were actually carrying out terrorist acts, we'd call it, in Paris and in London, bombings, shootings, and also in other countries, and most likely also in Sweden. Not only did we have a prime minister killed in 1986, but in the summer of 1986, there was a bomb in Stockholm in the office of the ANC. The ANC that is now in power in South Africa. So they were carrying out all these terrorist acts, and they were desperate because they started to feel that they are coming to an end, and so it was the last years of their existence, and they were also definitely a part of the Cold War, the war between capitalism and communism. Where they were on the good side. They were on the side of the UK and the USA. And as Craig Williamson put it when I met him, I did the dirty work for my government, and my government did the dirty work for Western governments. That tells a lot, I think.
So there's like a chain. Can you talk about traveling to South Africa in 1996 and what that part of your investigation was like?
Well, I wasn't there in 1996. In 1996, that was the time when the South African agents started telling on each other and started blaming each other for being involved in the murder of Olof Palme.
Right.
And that information had been around for 10 years, actually, because that information also came to the police, Swedish police, in the first days after the murder and continuously during these 10 years. But they never followed up on it, except in the second year of investigation for a short while.
So that was the that was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's when all that stuff came out, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, that's when several people stepped out and said Craig Williamson organized this killing using Bertil Wedin as a middleman in the killing also. So the information that Stieg Larsson handed in 9 years earlier came out 10 years after the murder suddenly in South Africa. And that became top news all over the world.
I see.
Then I traveled, and that was in 2016. So actually 20 years later than that, I went down there and I met with Craig Williamson and a lot of other agents, and also some of the victims of the terrorist acts that they were performing.
And I found it was interesting that they bombed a personal friend of Olof Palme. I think she was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement there. If it was at Fleck, or she was Joe Slovo's wife was one of
Ruth First in English, or Ruth First, I think is the Afrikaans say. But that was a parcel bomb that was sent by Craig Williamson. And he admitted to that also, and he says that it was aimed actually for Joe Slovo, but it was opened by his wife Ruth First, and she died. So that was one example of when actually Craig Williamson was involved in murders, or as he says, actually military acts.
They had a different outlook on those bombings and things like that. You talked to McPherson, who casually related a lot of his, all of his kind of warlike activities in a very blithe manner, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it was extremely cynical, and for someone who has not been in a war, it's completely it's hard to understand that you can look at it in this way, even because now it's been peace in relative peace, at least in South Africa for 25 years or so, and it's they should be able to realize what they were actually doing at the time, but that doesn't really seem to be the case.
And can you talk a little bit more about what happened after you interviewed Vedin and how your investigation progressed?
Yeah, so after I interviewed Vedin, I also realized that he had only very few friends, and one of his close friends was actually a Swedish person that I had come across earlier also, but I didn't know that he knew Bertil Vedin. But I found out actually through emails that I got delivered from a person who has helped me a lot in this story, Miss Lida Komarkova from the Czech Republic. So I got Bertil Vedin's emails in my hands, and I realized that he had a very close acquaintance. And it was a person that I later found out had been also a very strong suspect in the murder. And that's where we come into the second part of the book, where I come after the actual people that were involved in the killing.
And I mean, it's interesting. Your investigation kind of parallels the girl with the dragon tattoo, because the main character has this other woman, Lisbeth Santander, who does a lot of his research, and you seem to have found your own Lisbeth Santander in the Czech Republic. Did you ever see any interesting parallels like that?
Well, I didn't at the time, really, but afterwards it's pretty obvious, because the woman that helped me, she was daring. She was she had got tattoos actually, and she was also when I asked her if she would help me, she said no, yes, in a way that a normal person, I would say, wouldn't say. She wouldn't do it like that. She said yes before she realized that she could say no. And she became definitely my Lisbeth Salander, and she met with this person that I think is heavily involved in the actual killing of our Prime Minister, and using cameras and recording equipment to actually get quite a lot of information that I have handed in to the police also.
Gotcha. And one of the things that was interesting about Stieg Larsson was that he had written a book called The Extreme Right in 1991, and how that this kind of theme pervaded his books as well. And when I read his book, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I thought that maybe the mentions of Nazis was a little bit more an artifice, more of a fictional thing. But did you think that there's that many right-wing or hard-right type sympathizers in Sweden in 1986, even to the present?
Well, Stieg Larsson definitely wrote about the real world, including the Nazi connections. So of course Sweden was neutral in the war, but for the first 3-4 years of the Second World War, there were probably more pro-German sentiment here than pro-ally sentiment. And when they started losing, it turned quite quickly, I would say. So it's and quite a few of the Nazis survived and whitewashed themselves and were successful in their businesses and even in politics. So it's definitely a true description in that sense. So it's. And I learned a lot from that, also from even from the novels, but also from Stieg Larsson's archive, where there were lots of names that I would have a hard time actually publishing here, because you would be attacking actually quite powerful people in Sweden. So what he did was actually to use his research to write these novels with a political backdrop all the time.
Interesting. Because I thought that there was a parallel between the main family and the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and the Wallenberg family. Did you find that parallel to be accurate? Or
I wouldn't go that far,
okay.
Actually. they're also very powerful, the Wallenbergs have definitely been involved in a lot of business, also with Nazi Germany. But I would never call them Nazis. Actually, that I wouldn't go that far.
But
so, sorry.
Vedin himself did have time or worked for one of their newspapers, though. Is that correct, Bertil Vedin?
He worked for a news service, a newsletter that they were publishing. That's true, and he was actually indirectly working. And there was only one person in between him and Marcus Wallenberg, the older one, but the senior Marcus Wallenberg. But he was. So in that sense, you may say that they have this connotation, but Bertil Vedin is not a Nazi either, I would say. But he calls himself a fierce anti-communist. So there are always ways of describing things in different ways, as you know.
Right, good terms. But Vedin himself came out and said he was against Palme as well, though. I think that was in the book as well.
Oh yeah, he has been quoted in a press conference actually, where he said that I devote my life to fight communism and also to fight the government, the Swedish government, mainly Olof Palme, together with the Nordic secret services. So he was actually saying that he was working for the Swedish secret service, but also for others in Denmark and Norway.
Interesting. One of the aspects of the book I found interesting was that how the police seemed to have almost intentionally bungled. You referenced something in Pippi Longstocking, Flick and Flack, these kind of Keystone. Actually, one of your titles is Keystone Cops. Did you feel that any of that was intentional, or did you find any evidence for that?
No, I think the quote in the English version on the first page is actually don't put malice behind something where there is enough with stupidity.
Right, Hamlin's razor is what you quoted. That's good. I'm going to remember that.
So. And that's I would say that there may be one or two actually crooked police officers in this, especially in the secret police. But I think the main thing actually is just that they're just stupid and really, really unprofessional in how they perform the investigation.
Well, we are at 45 minutes, Jan. Is there anything I missed, anything you would like to include or while we wrap it up, and how can people get the book?
Well, I would say the most important thing for me was actually to write something that is entertaining to read on a quite a hard topic. So it's, if you're interested in these times, but think it is too hard to get into, but you want to read something about it and you like thrillers, so then you should read this book. That was my whole intention. I'll probably follow up with something much drier. So, and the book you can get at Amazon, and also you should be able to get it at normal bookstores all over the U.S.
And your website again is Stocklassa, your last name, STOCKLASSA.com. And it is a great read. It is very fascinating, lots of details, and really enriched my understanding of Swedish history and Stieg Larsson. So I commend you for writing the book. It's an excellent book. Congratulations.
Thank you, William. That's really great to hear.
All right, John. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, William. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.